The Battle of Le Transloy was the last offensive of the Fourth Army of the British Expeditionary Force in the 1916 Battle of the Somme in France. During the First World War, the battle was fought in conjunction with attacks by the French 10th and 6th Armies on the southern flank and the reserve 5th Army on the northern flank, against Heeresgruppe created on 28 August. From the 1st and 2nd Armies of the dissolved Army Gruppe Galwitz Somme and the 6th and 7th Armies, General Ferdinand Foch, the commander of Group des Armées du Nord and coordinator of the armies on the Somme, was unable to continue the sequential attacks by the Anglo-French armies achieved in September, because persistent rain, mist and fog grounded aircraft, turned the battlefield into a swamp and greatly increased the difficulty of transporting supplies to the front over the few roads in the area and the land that had been devastated since the 1st of July. The German 2nd and 1st Armies on the Somme managed a recovery after the string of defeats in September, with fresh divisions to replace exhausted troops and more aircraft, artillery and ammunition diverted from the battle at Verdun and stripped from other parts of the Western Front. Command of the German air service was centralized and the new Luftstreitkräfte was able to challenge Anglo-French air superiority with the reinforcements and new, superior fighter aircraft. The German flyers further reduced the ability of the Anglo-French airmen to support the armies with artillery observation and contact patrols. In the rare periods of clear weather, the German armies lost much less ground and had fewer casualties in October than in September, but the proportion of casualties increased from 78.9–82.3% of the Anglo-French total. The reinforcement of the Somme front, with troops and equipment from Verdun, also contributed to the German defeat in the First Offensive Battle of Verdun and the loss of Forts Douaumont and Varques. Rain, fog and mud was a lesser problem for the Germans, who had to carry supplies forward over a much narrower beaten zone and were being forced back onto undamaged ground. German bombardments on the few roads between the original front line and the line established by October increased the difficulties of the 4th and 6th Armies, and during October the size and ambition of attacks was reduced progressively to local operations. The soldiers of the British, French and German armies endured miserable conditions, in which the Germans were able to keep going in the knowledge that the onset of winter would end the Somme offensive. Despite the many extra casualties caused by illness, the British and French benefited from superior numbers, which enabled the Allied commanders to relieve divisions after shorter periods in the line. Severe criticism of General Sir Douglas Haig and General Henry Rawlinson during and since the war, for persisting with attacks on October, was challenged in 2009 by Philpott, who put the British share of the battle into the context of strategic subordination to French wishes. Joffre's general Allied offensive and the continuation of French attacks south of Le Transloy, which had to be supported by British operations and by more recent writing of the ordeal inflicted on the German armies. Background: strategic developments in September. Foch had managed to organize sequential attacks by the four Anglo-French armies on the Somme, which had captured more ground than any previous month and inflicted the worst casualties on the German armies of the battle. During the Battle of Morval, the French 6th Army had crossed the Péronne-Bapaume road around Bouchavans. The 4th Army had taken Morval, Les Buffs and Goadecourt in the centre, and the Reserve Army, which became the 5th Army on 30 October, had captured most of Thiepval Ridge on the left flank. On 29 September, General Sir Douglas Haig instructed the 4th Army to plan operations to advance towards Bapaume, reaching Le Transloy on the right and Loupart Wood north of the Albert Bapaume road on the left. The Reserve Army was to extend the attacks of the 4th Army by making converging attacks on the Ancre Valley after the Battle of Thiepval Ridge, by attacking northwards towards Loupart Wood, Earls and Miramont on the south bank. On 28 August, The Chief of the General Staff, General Erich von Falkenhayn, simplified the German command structure on the Western Front by establishing two army groups. Gruppe Kronprinz Ruprecht controlled the 6th, 1st and 2nd Armies, from the Belgian coast to the boundary of Gruppe Deutsche Kronprinz, south of the Somme battlefield. Heeresgruppe Gallwitz Somme was dissolved and General Max von Gallwitz reverted to the command of the 2nd Army. The emergency in Russia caused by the Brusilov offensive, the entry of Romania into the war and French counterattacks at Verdun, put further strain on the German army. Falkenhayn had been sacked from the OL on 28 August and replaced by Hindenburg and Ludendorff. This third OL ordered an end to attacks at Verdun and the dispatch of troops to Romania and the Somme front. Colonel Fritz von Lossberg, Chief of Staff of the 2nd Army, was also able to establish Ablassung's division N 10 to 15 miles behind the battlefield, ready to replace tired divisions. German counterattacks became bigger and more frequent, making the Anglo-French advance slower and more costly. After the Anglo-French attacks in mid-September, a comprehensive relief of the front-line divisions had been possible. On 5 September, proposals for a shorter line to be built in France were ordered from the commanders of the Western armies, who met Hindenburg and Ludendorff at Cambrai on 8 September. The new leadership announced that no reserves were available for offensive operations, except those planned for Romania. Ludendorff condemned the policy of holding ground regardless of its tactical value and advocated holding frontline positions with the minimum of troops and to recapture lost positions by counterattacks. On 21 September, after the Battle of Flores-Courcelette, Hindenburg ordered that the Somme front was to have priority in the west for troops. During September, the Germans had sent another 13 fresh divisions to the British sector and scraped up troops wherever they could be found. The German artillery had fired 213 trainloads of field artillery shells and 217 trainloads of heavy artillery ammunition. Yet the acute BUT of the tank, the defeat at Thiepval and the 130,000 casualties suffered by the armies on the Somme in September had been severe blows to German morale. Tactical developments. German artillery on the Somme slowly improved in its effect when Gallwitz centralized counter-battery fire and used aircraft reinforcements for artillery observation, which increased the accuracy and efficiency of bombardments. The 2nd Army had been starved of reinforcements in mid-August to replace exhausted divisions in the 1st Army, and plans for a counterstroke had been abandoned for lack of troops. Reinforcements for the Somme front in September began to reduce the German inferiority in guns and aircraft. Field artillery reduced its barrage frontage from 400 to 200 yards per battery and increased its accuracy by using one air artillery flight per division. As the Germans had been pushed out of their original defenses, Lossberg established new positions based on principles of depth, dispersal and camouflage, rather than continuous lines of trenches. Rigid defense of the front line continued, but with as few soldiers as possible, relying on the firepower of machine guns firing from behind the front line and from the flanks. The area behind the front line was defended by support and reserve units, dispersed on reverse slopes, undulations and in any other cover that could be found, so that they could open machine gun fire by surprise from unseen positions and then counter-attack swiftly, before French and British infantry could consolidate captured ground. The largest German counter-attacks of the Somme battle took place from 20 to 23 September, from the Somme north to Saint Pierre Vaast Wood, and were destroyed by French artillery fire. Rather than pack troops into the front line, local corps and army reserves were held back, in lines about 2,000 yards apart, able to make progressively stronger counter-attacks. Trenches were still dug but were no longer intended to be fought from, being used for shelter during quiet periods, for the movement of reinforcements and supplies, and as rallying points and decoys. Before an attack, the garrison tried to move forwards into shell holes to avoid Allied artillery fire and to surprise attacking infantry with machine gun fire. Opposite the French, the Germans dug new defences on a reverse slope from the Tortille stream at Alaines to the west end of St. Pierre Vaast Wood and from there to Morval, connected to a new fourth position from Sailly-Sallisalle to Morval and Bapaume along the Péronne-Bapaume road. French agents also reported new construction 35 miles to the east. Ludendorff created 15 new divisions by combing out troops at depots and by removing regiments from existing divisions, and the new 212th, 213th and 214th divisions replaced worn-out divisions opposite the French 10th and 6th armies. Prelude. Anglo-French plan of attack. Fayol planned attacks to capture Sailly-Sallisalle to the northwest of St. Pierre Vaast Wood, to be followed by outflanking attacks to the north and south, avoiding a frontal attack. Fayol expected to be ready to attack Sailly-Sallisalle by 7 to 8 October, but if an attack towards Raucoigne could begin earlier, the Fourth Army was to attack to cover the French left flank. Sailly-Sallisalle was along the Péronne-Bapaume road and Sallisalle lay at right angles on the east side, along the Moislaines Street, Pierre Vaast road, and overlooked a shallow valley to the north towards Le Transloy. The difficulties of movement in the rear, a wet weather in October and the terrain, channeled the attacks of the Sixth Army into a gap between Street Pierre Vaast Wood and the Fourth Army boundary. At the end of September, the Sixth Army took over the Fourth Army front at Morval, which widened the attack front to about 2.5 miles. The French 32nd Corps, which held the front from Rancourt to Fréjaucourt, was to attack the Sallisalles, and First Corps to the left would attack eastwards from Morval, to capture Bukovina and Jatagezov trenches in the German 4th position in front of the Péronne-Bapaume road, capture the north end of the Sallisalles and reach Raucoigne. The 4th, Reserve and 3rd Armies were to be ready by the 12th of October, the 4th Army to attack towards Le Transloy, Boulencourt, the ridge beyond the Loy-Wallencourt Valley to Loupart Wood. Before the main attack, the Fourth Army was to advance northeastwards, to capture a spur west of Le Transloy and Boulencourt and north to the edge of the Loy-Wallencourt Valley. Haig thought that if there was normal autumn weather, the objectives could be achieved, but some restrictions on artillery ammunition consumption were imposed and more aircraft were requested from England. An attack on the 1st of October was to advance the left flank, capture Eaucourt and part of the Fleurs line up to Les Sars. The Reserve Army was to advance towards Pouilly, as the right flank met the attacks from the south bank at Miramont, enveloping German troops in the upper Ancre Valley. The Third Army was to provide a flank guard north of the Reserve Army, by occupying a spur south of Gommecourt. Operations were to begin by the 12th of October, after the Fourth Army had attacked towards Le Transloy and Boulencourt and the French Sixth Army had attacked Sailly-Sallisalle. The French 10th Army south of the Somme was to attack on the 10th of October, north of Chaulnes. Fourth Army. The attack was to be conducted by 3rd Corps and the New Zealand Division of 15th Corps on the right flank, which was to advance its left, pivoting from a point in the Gerd trenches, 1,500 yards east of Eaucourt. On the 29th of September, a day of rain and bright spells, the 6th Division and the Guards Division in 14th Corps on the right flank took unopposed some trenches east of Les Buffs. At 5:30 a.m., a company of the 8th Battalion York and Lancaster Regiment of the 23rd Division captured d'Estremont Farm and gained contact with the 2nd Canadian Division on the right flank of the Reserve Army. Later on, a battalion of the 47th Division began to bomb its way up Fleurs Trench during the evening. On the 30th of September, the day was dull but dry. The battalion pushed the Germans back beyond Fleurs Switch Trench and a New Zealand battalion kept pace along Fleurs Support Trench. German defensive preparations. The Germans had built new defensive lines during the battle, and the first two were called the Einstellung, Linenstellung, a double line of trenches and barbed wire several miles further back, as a new second line of defense along the ridge north of the Ancre Valley, from Essarts to Bucquoy, west of Inchy-le-Petit, Loupart Wood, south of Gravelines, west of Bapaume to Le Transloy and Sailly-Saint-Lizel. On the reverse slope of that ridge, the Two-Stellung, Armenstellung ran from Ablainesville to west of Logiest Wood, west of Inchy-le-Grand, the western outskirts of Bapaume, to Roqueignier, Le Mesnil en Ariciza to Varques Wood. Three-Stellung branched from Two-Stellung at Inchy-le-Grand and ran clockwise around Bapaume, then south to Buny, Ytres, Nerlou and Tempelou-la-Fosse. The first two German reserve lines had various British titles, and the third line was known as the Buny-Ytres Switch. From the 25th of September to the beginning of October, Ruprecht relieved the 6th Bavarian Division, 50th Reserve Division and the 52nd Reserve Division with the 7th Reserve Division, 6th Bavarian Reserve Division and 18th Reserve Division opposite the 4th Army, part of 13 fresh divisions installed opposite the British. From the 30th of September to the 13th of October, the 6 divisions from Le Transloy to the Ancre River were relieved by 7 fresh divisions, 2 of which were then relieved by the 6th Division, 2nd Bavarian Division, 19th Reserve Division, 28th Reserve Division, 24th Division, 40th Division, 4th Ersatz Division, 5th Ersatz Division and Marinekkorps Flandern from the Belgian coast.